Would Biden or Trump's policies help or hurt housing costs? Housing has found its way to the grown-ups table in effect for the first time. What tools does the federal government have at its disposal to make home ownership more affordable? Improve consumer access to financing for manufactured housing. Hello, and welcome to Princess Comfort News Channel. I am your host, Kaylee on the Spot, reporting to you live regarding, did you know that the federal government can help with the cost of housing prices? On this channel, we discuss all things related to real estate. Please hit the subscribe button to follow for more. Today, we're going to discuss things that Biden administration and Congress could consider, according to experts who study this issue. The cost to buy a home has reached historic highs in the U.S. The median price of a home is $420,000. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, and housing and mortgage costs are increasingly turning into November election issue. Home shoppers today need to have an annual income of $114,000 in order to comfortably afford a typical home in the U.S. According to Redfin, nearly double what was needed to afford a typical home in 2020. That figure is far above the 2022 median household income of $74,580, according to the Census Bureau. Higher monthly payments are driven by higher home prices, as well as significantly higher interest rates. Mortgage interest rates, which dipped to a historic low of 2.65% on a 30-year fixed mortgage in 2021, have soared beyond 7%, higher than they have been since 2001. Interest rates are set by the independent Federal Reserve, and President Joe Biden has insisted on the Fed's independence. The Federal Reserve has been raising interest rates since 2021 in order to combat stubborn inflation. So what tools does the federal government have at its disposal to make home ownership more affordable? Today we're going to discuss things that Biden administration and Congress could consider, according to experts who study this issue. Providing tax benefits for builders who produce entry-level homes. There should be an effort to increase the housing stock, particularly of smaller entry-level homes. Once interest rates are moved from the picture, then you're left focusing mainly on the supply shortfall, said Jim Parrott. He's the fellow at the Urban Institute and former Obama White House economic advisor. The housing market has seen severe shortage of smaller starter homes, Parrott said. Builders, he said, are incentivized to build large, often mansion-like homes, which more easily turn a profit. The cost of building larger homes tend to be quite high, and it's easier to recoup those costs if you're making big, expensive homes. The federal government needs to make the math for building homes at the bottom of the market more favorable for developers, Parrott suggested. And Congress can do this with the tax code. One approach would be to give a tax cut to builders who construct a residence for a first-time buyer at below the median home price, Parrott said. You need to provide some sort of tax benefit for building homes in the parts of the market where we need them the most. But getting this divided, Congress to work together on something like this will be more challenging. I'm afraid that the legislative environment right now just isn't conducive to this sort of big effort. Hopefully, after the election, we'll see a reboot that provides a more hopeful window. Withholding funding from locals that don't change zoning laws. Most of the control over zoning lies with state and local governments, and states have been working to overhaul zoning to ease restrictions on denser residential construction. But the federal government isn't entirely powerless on zoning. Parrott said that the federal government has used a carrot approach to encourage locals to rezone in favor of denser housing, But now he thinks maybe it's time to use a stick. For instance, any federal funding for communities could be conditioned on how zoning decisions are made. Communities receive substantial financial support from the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Transportation Department and other agencies for projects. If federal policymakers were conditioned even a little bit of some of that funding on whether or not local decision making is supportive of or prohibitive of more density, then you could begin to change things at the local level in any way that would really matter, said Parrott. Such a move would be almost certain to trigger strict opposition from locals and unions. But more states have already been enacting legislation to supersede local zoning rules. 9 states have passed laws allowing accessible dwelling units, or ADUs, like small independent mother-in-law suites on homeowners' property. Another way that advisors are suggesting that the federal government can help with housing prices is sell federal land to use for housing. The federal government owns hundreds and hundreds of millions of acres. And we're not talking about the national parks here, said Edward. He is the co-director of the American Enterprise Institute's Housing Center. But that's a proposal that Congress would need to authorize. Senator Mike Lee's House Act of 2022 would have been approved the sale of federal land to states and locals for below market rates for housing projects. The federal government owns 2/3 of the land in Lee's home state of Utah, and the gap between median household income and median home cost is the largest in the West, according to HUD. But his bill went nowhere. The Bureau of Land Management, which oversees federal land, said in written Senate testimony that it would be forced to sell land without sufficient evaluation of the values to the public or to future generations, or sufficient compensation to the American taxpayer. The sale of unused land could also attract opposition from environmentalist groups, though sometimes that can be overcome. In March, Washington Governor Jay Inslee signed a law that will allow the state departments of natural resources to transfer some of its property to locals to build affordable housing. Washington State GOP Representative April Connors, who introduced the bill, noted that the DNR had 7,000 acres of land that was unusable for timber harvesting because it was too close to developed land. Builders housing on it could ease the shortage of homes in Washington, Connors noted. In a statement, pointing out that the state had the fewest housing units per household in the nation, and nearly half of renters spend 1/3 of their income on rent. Improve consumer access to financing for manufactured housing. Manufactured homes are factory-built residences built after 1976, formerly known as mobile homes, that can be placed on land. The average new manufactured home sold for $126,600 in November of 2023, according to Census Bureau. But loans are harder for home buyers to secure manufactured homes than for traditional ones. And since manufactured housing usually involves shipping over state lines, the federal government plays a big role. HUD controls access to financing for manufactured homes, and rules are stricter than they are for traditional homes. Interest rates are typically also higher for manufactured home loans than for traditional home loans, in part because, unlike traditional homes, which tend to appreciate in value over time, manufactured homes can depreciate. The structures are also viewed as riskier than conventional homes because they're usually harder to sell on the market. An advisor suggests that HUD could make it easier for borrowers to access loans. Eliminate tax breaks for second and third homes. Congress could increase the national housing stock over time by eliminating tax breaks for any homes that aren't a primary residence. Getting rid of the mortgage interest rates deduction for non-primary residents would eventually encourage many homeowners to sell. Why should they be subsidized by the tax code? Without that tax break, hundreds of thousands of homes would come back onto the market as primary residences. It will cost the federal government basically nothing, Pinto said. They actually save some money on the tax savings, and it would not increase demand at all. This isn't likely to happen soon, though. Such a measure would have to be passed by Congress, and many lawmakers own second and third residences, and their number of their constituents and donors own multiple homes. Realtor interest groups would oppose it too. The most Congress has done in recent years to address tax breaks for expensive residences was in 2017, when the GOP-controlled Congress capped the deduction limit for state and local income taxes, which hit coastal heavily, Democrat states like New York and California particularly hard. Still, eliminating the tax breaks for secondary home is low-hanging fruit and would increase supply and reduce demand simultaneously. Lowering interest rates probably wouldn't lower housing costs. Economics mostly doubt the action by the Federal Reserve to significantly lower interest rates would help much. If the Fed were to cut rates in a way that allowed mortgage rates to fall to the 4% range, we would see both supply and demand increase in the housing market. And whether home prices rise or fall would depend on what then happened to housing supply and demand. If demand increases more, then prices would grow at a faster rate than they currently are. However, it is also possible that supply would increase more because sellers have been so locked in by low existing mortgage rates. If that's the case, then price growth could fall. Would Biden or Trump's policies help or hurt housing costs? Former President Donald Trump hasn't offered policy suggestions to addressing housing affordability yet. Although he criticizes mortgage interest rates and home prices under President Biden, the president has proposed giving a $10,000 tax credit to first-time middle-class home buyers and up to $25,000 to first-generation home buyers. He's also introducing a $20 billion fund that, in addition to helping build affordable rental units, is meant to peel away local barriers to housing development and spur the construction of starter homes. Down payment assistance may help home shoppers in the near term, although the tax credit probably falls short of the traditional 20% down on most homes. With monthly payments at record highs, this down payment assistance would not lower monthly cost. And down payment assistance could have unintended consequences, Pinto said. It would increase the price of entry-level homes. The effect down payment assistance or buyer tax credit will have on the housing market is complicated in a supply-constrained market. While Trump hasn't made specific proposals on housing, his proposals in other policy areas would likely drive home prices up, said Parrott. Mass deportations of undocumented immigrants, for instance, could drive the cost of labor higher, and raising tariffs on China could drive up material costs, said Parrott. Things that Trump has said relevant to housing almost all cut the wrong way, Parrott said. How home costs could affect the election. The cost of home ownership is top concern for Democrats and Republicans, city dwellers, and rural residents alike. Once an issue has broken through the barriers of red and blue, metro and rural then changes the probability of something happening, Parrott said. Housing has found its way to the grown-ups table in effect for the first time. And even though it's the Fed that controls interest rates, Mr. Biden could be held accountable by voters. President Biden's re-election is closely tied to the cost of home ownership and thus the fixed mortgage rates. The fixed rates is currently just over 7%. If it rises above 8% for any length of time, his re-election odds will fade. And if it falls closer to 6%, his odds will increase meaningfully, all else equal. That wraps up today's video. Home prices have become increasingly, ridiculously expensive, in between, above, left, and right. If the government can do something about home ownership prices, they should, because no one else can. They are in these seats to help us out in these type of crisis situations, because we have did numerous of videos that homelessness rates are getting higher and higher. And that includes our seniors, which are more vulnerable. So I will leave these two videos right here and right here for you to watch next. Thank you guys for tuning in with us. If you haven't done already, please hit subscribe to catch the next video. Thank you and have a great day.